5:30. So I will now call to order the THPRD Board of Directors work session for December 8th, 2021. Jessica, will you please call roll? Or do I need to repeat that because recording didn't start? Sorry.
We're good.
Okay.
TAP?
Here.
TAP? Heidi Edwards?
Here.
Barbie Miner?
Here.
Lisa de Monteblanco?
Here.
Alfredo Moreno?
Here.
Okay, and then today I think we have a presentation from Washington County Preschool for All.
You bet. We'll have maybe Sabrina kick us off here.
Sounds good. Jessica, if you want to pull up that presentation. I'm Sabrina Taylor-Schmidt. I'm the Interim Recreation and Aquatics Director, and today I'm here to presenting with Sarah Pope. And I'm not sure if Megan's coming or not, so but I have a little bit of a bio to read for you, so I'll get that going for you. Sarah Pope is the Deputy Superintendent at Northwest Regional ESD, the largest educational service district in Oregon. As Deputy Superintendent, Sarah oversees early childhood and school-age special education, instruction services, and the county service centers. Before coming to Northwest Regional ESD, Sarah was the Chief of Staff at the Oregon Department of Education and the Interim Director at Stand for Children, and a national not-for-profit child advocacy program. Overall, Sarah's career represents more than a decade of educational leadership in the state of Oregon. Megan, who I believe popped in while I was reading this, is the facilitator for the Washington County Preschool for All Task Force. She is the public policy consultant who works on issues related to early care and education, preschool, and childcare. She supported Multnomah County to develop their successful Universal Preschool Initiative from 2018 to 2020. Previously, she served as Oregon's Early Learning Systems Director and as the administrator for early childhood education in the Beaverton School District. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Sarah and Megan.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for making time on your agenda. I do have that version of Teams where I just can't see anybody. I keep bugging my IT department that I need to get the actual version downloaded, but that hasn't happened yet. So if people, if I miss a question, maybe somebody could just be watching for questions because I see little boxes with initials, but that's about it right now. Thank you, Sabrina. And before we get going, I know Megan Irwin is here as well. So we're just going to do, that was a beautiful introduction. I almost am embarrassed by it. So I won't further introduce myself. I think we're just going to dive in unless, Megan, you wanted to add anything. She did say she's here, but her computer is on its last leg. Okay, I'm going to get going. So I want to thank Felicita for making the invitation and Sabrina and her team with working us in preparation. We will keep this presentation to no more than 20 minutes because we want to make sure that there's lots of time for questions and discussion. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide. Why I'm involved in this work. So professionally, and many of you probably have this experience either through children you've raised, cousins that you're involved with, grandchildren you might be a part of their lives, but we might all know, or professionally through your work with THPRD, that preschool matters. And professionally, from my experience over at the ESD, we provide early childhood services for kids in special education. And we know in Washington County that there just are not nearly enough preschool placements for the kids who we serve. Personally, I'm the mom of a kindergartner and a preschooler. I see firsthand the value of preschool, and I also see the challenges in Washington County as it relates to affordability and access, which we're going to talk more about in a little bit. I was really excited when the ESD partnered with our school districts in Washington County to bring a task force together, which are the recommendations from the task force, is what you're going to hear about in this presentation. Because knowing that if we can make an upstream impact and investment specifically in our early childhood programs, we see really significant impacts throughout those children's lives and also throughout our larger community. We also know through research that investing in preschool gives us some of the best return on investment that we see in any program. So what research has shown is that we get an ROI of about $7 to $10 for every dollar that we invest in preschool. And that's for, their entire economy and community sees that. For the child, we also know that children who have access to programs that celebrate both their home culture and their language help build a really positive sense of self and identity that can carry throughout that child's lifetime. And that families with children in preschool programs are also then more actively involved in their children's elementary school experience. And last but not least, we know from early brain research that a child's brain is developing the most between birth to age 5, and that the sooner that children have access to enriching early learning experiences, the sooner they start to develop those social, emotional, and academic skills they need later to succeed in life. And preschool is one of the best developmental strategies, most cost effective in which to do that. So that was what brought the ESD to the table, and why we worked with our school districts to convene this task force to investigate what could be done, what is the challenge in Washington County, and what could be done to address it. So if you don't mind advancing to the next slide.
Sarah, I am here now.
You are here.
I got
Excellent.
my computer. I didn't know if you could see that I popped back on.
I hear your voice.
Great. Do you want me to pick?
Yeah,
up
do you want to
where
take
I
this one?
usually do? Okay. First, hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you tonight. My name's Megan Irwin. I'm the facilitator of the Washington County Task Force, and my apologies for being a bit late. I hopped on. My computer immediately decided it wasn't feeling it and turned itself off. And so I had some technical difficulties, but I'm here now and so happy to be. So just building on what Sarah said, we wanted to take a couple of slides to really just emphasize the impact that preschool can have on a child's life, not only for the time that they are in the preschool program itself, but over the span of an entire lifetime. And one of the best studies to really point to that emphasizes that impact is the Perry Preschool study. As folks that are engaged already in early childhood education, thinking and learning about this kind of stuff, and I know you run early childhood programs yourselves, you may be familiar with this study. But the Perry Preschool study is one of the most famous pieces of research in early childhood education. It's a longitudinal study that followed the trajectory of children who participated in the Perry Preschool program, a very high quality program that really a lot of our design work is modeled off of, as well as a control group of children who did not participate in the program. And the longitudinal study followed them across the span of their entire lifetimes for 40 years, and found that the students that participated in the Perry Preschool who had access to that quality, enriching early learning experience experienced positive outcomes across many domains of their life. You can see here education, lifetime earnings, involvement with the criminal justice system, et cetera, compared to the children who did not get access to the program. And just to really drive the impact home further, the Heckman Institute, which is a national economic research institute, actually published a study in 2019 that looked at the intergenerational impact of the program and found substantial second generation effects for the children who went to the Perry Preschool as compared to the children in the control group. Children of Perry Preschool participants were less likely to be suspended from school, more likely to graduate high school, more likely to be employed. It also had better lifelong health outcomes than the children in the control group. And I always like to just bring that piece into the conversation because it really underlines the return on investment we can get from preschool over the span of generations, and the enormous impact that can make on somebody's life, the life of their children, the life of their grandchildren. And you can really kind of extrapolate out from there what that means for society, for the health of our communities, et cetera. If you go to the next slide, this is just another slide that shows the return on investment. Oh, if we just flip to the next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I only have these 2 slides.
I think there's a delay. That is the right one.
Okay, great.
Oh, here we go. Oh, sorry. Okay. My computer might just be running slow. So this slide just kind of underscores the point I was just making around return on investment. This also comes from the Heckman Institute. And what I really want to draw your attention to, although I may be preaching to the choir on this one, is that the earlier we invest, the greater the return on that investment. If we can make investments in programming that supports and nurtures brain development, social development, and academic development early, we get a much bigger bang for the buck in preschool and early childhood than we do far down the line over in the job training section, where we're really doing like postvention or trying to intervene in people's lives later. So the takeaway here is just preschool is an excellent investment for long-term outcomes over the span of a person's entire academic career, as well as the span of their lifetime. We can go forward to the next slide. So that's one of the reasons why the Preschool for All Task Force has taken shape and has pulled itself together to try and tackle some of the challenges that Washington County faces when it comes to preschool access in your community right now. So we're going to turn to talking about the current landscape, the current policy context in the community. I'm going to frame up for you some of the core challenges that Washington County is facing when it comes to making sure that every child has the opportunity to benefit from positive preschool experiences, and really just give you a quick look at the lay of the land and the context in which we're currently operating. So we can hop to the next slide. The first thing I like to start with before I go into all of the challenges that the community is facing is just the excitement and the potential of the moment that we are in currently. Preschool and early childhood education and childcare in general are on the radar nationally and at the state level currently in a way that it just hasn't been before or hasn't been in a really long time. Our legislature has made large investments in expanding state-funded preschool programs. They've made investments in early childhood culturally specific programs specifically. There's unprecedented interest at the federal level, as we know, through the Biden administration's Build Back Better proposal and investing in universal preschool as well as childcare. And your next door neighbors in Multnomah County passed a similar measure. This slide needs to be edited. It says 7 months ago. It should say a year ago now. But Multnomah County passed a similar measure by 64% just 1 year ago to expand preschool access. So while there are challenges that your community faces when it comes to making preschool a reality for every child, there is something to be said for the opportunity and the momentum and the passion that exists around this issue in this moment that we're existing in right now. Having said that, there are challenges that we want all of the folks that are interested in this initiative to be knowledgeable about. It really frames up why the Preschool for All Washington County Task Force's work is so important right now. There are really three big challenges in the community. The first is capacity and affordability. Second, we've got some barriers to overcome when it comes to attracting and keeping and really supporting the preschool workforce. And then third, there are inequities and disparities that families face in Washington County that need to be addressed through any early childhood initiative, through any universal preschool measure. So if we go to the next slide, let's start with the challenge around capacity and affordability. So Washington County is unfortunately a childcare desert, which means that it's also a preschool desert. What that means is that for every 3 children who need a spot in a quality childcare program, there is only 1 spot available. So any of you who have young children who have been trying to find childcare or preschool and have been sitting on wait lists for a really long time, this is why. There's not capacity that exists for every child in Washington County to have a slot in a childcare or a preschool. When it comes to publicly funded programs, that would be the state's Preschool Promise program or the federally funded Head Start Oregon Pre-Kindergarten program, there are only 2,216 publicly funded slots for like 15,000 3- and 4-year-olds. In addition to that, like I just said, there are not even enough private pay or tuition slots available for every child who needs one. And the tuition slots that are available, the private pay programs that are available, are extremely expensive, out of reach for many families, or families need childcare, they need preschool, their child needs to be somewhere while they're at work. They're having to make really big sacrifices to figure out how to squeeze it into their budget. And you can see the median cost of care here on the slide is up to the controls are blocking it, but I believe it's from around $650-ish a month to almost $1,400 a month as the median cost of care in your community. We all know families that are paying much more than that. And the takeaway here is just really currently preschool is unaffordable, and families have to make enormous sacrifices in their monthly budget to be able to have their child have access to quality preschool, and to be someplace safe and secure while they're at work. So not enough supply. The supply that exists is in large part unaffordable for most families in the community. If we move on to the next slide to challenge number 2, we can't have universal preschool without a well-supported, highly skilled, talented workforce, right? Preschool teachers and assistants are the drivers of a successful program. And right now, we quite simply just don't have enough of them. This is a very high turnover profession. This was true before COVID. It's become even more true during COVID. This work is very challenging. Wages are low. You can see here the median hourly wage for a head teacher in a center-based program is between $13 and $18 an hour. Those are the absolute highest paid preschool professionals in the community. Centers tend to pay more. Head teacher is like the highest classroom job. And that wage is less than what Amazon is currently paying as it's recruiting delivery drivers. And it's about on par with what the Burgerville next to my house here in St. John's in Portland is paying as an hourly wage for workers. So really low wages for highly complex, very valuable work has led to a lot of turnover in the workforce. And then in addition to the low wage, there just isn't the level of professional development, training, or support to help providers and teachers feel connected to a larger community of professionals. And for folks that want to pursue certification through like a formal degree process at a community college or a university, there are not a lot of pathways into that if you're somebody who needs support, or if you're somebody who's caring for children 10 hours a day. So in order to reach our goals for universal preschool, we have to really be thoughtful about how we're investing in and supporting the workforce, both in terms of providing living wages and benefits, as well as providing more support for people who are in the profession and more support for people who want to join it. And then finally, the third challenge on the next slide. There are significant disparities and inequities in accessing preschool and childcare in this community. So in a childcare desert, everyone's going to have a hard time getting access to what they need. And if you're a person who faces systemic barriers like racism, ableism, poverty, the impact of living in a childcare desert is even more severe. In 2019, your local early learning hub, Early Learning Washington County, did an analysis on who experiences the greatest disparities, or put another way, who has the least access to childcare and preschool. And you can see here on this slide, that is children from Black and Indigenous communities, as well as all communities of color, children who experience housing instability, low-income children, and then children who have multiple vulnerabilities. So the more impacted you are by these systemic barriers, the more vulnerable you are, the greater the challenge is to find a program that you can get a slot in and afford, let alone to find a program that actually meets your linguistic needs, your cultural needs, or that can serve your child if they have a developmental delay or disability. So some real kind of structural inequities that Preschool for All is seeking to solve for within the context of developing what would eventually be a universal program. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide. This slide just shows more, we could never think enough, I think, about what parents want and need. This slide just really highlights what parents are telling us that they want. This again comes from research that Early Learning Washington County conducted. And you can see parents really want a program that they can trust in a setting they feel comfortable in. They want a program that they can afford. And they want a program that is responsive to their child's needs and their family's needs, whether that means being able to be linguistically responsive, culturally specific or culturally responsive, or responsive to a child's support needs if they have a delay or disability. So it really comes down to trust, affordability, and responsiveness to need. The next slide just breaks it down even further. The things that parents told Early Learning Washington County that they are most concerned about. And you can see here again, cost, trust, the ability to access the program, transportation, and flexible hours really kind of come to the top of parents' concerns. And the affordability piece, I think I'd probably belaboring the point, but I feel like we can just really never emphasize it enough that parents of young children have always been under quite a bit of economic stress in Washington County. And that stress has become even more pronounced in COVID. I'm sure that each of you knows at least one family that is struggling to find care for their child, let alone the kind of quality early learning environment that will set them up for success later in life. And those stories are always so heartbreaking to hear. Those stories are also a big part of the motivation behind the Preschool for All task force. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now to talk more about how the task force is structured, what the timeline for their work is, what it is that we're doing to rally as a community around these challenges and come up with solutions to meet them.
Thank you, Megan. So I promise we're going to stay on time. So in the last 5 minutes, you're now going to hear a little bit about the task force and the recommendations. You've heard about the research, you've heard about the challenges, and we'll conclude with this last section. So you can go to the next slide. So the work ahead, we've seen both, like I mentioned, from the ESD perspective, not having enough preschool placements to place the children who we work directly with in early childhood special ed. And we've also been in touch with our 7 school district superintendents who are increasingly seeing the need to have much more access and much more affordable, high quality access to preschool. And it's a positive note, right, that we have K-12 superintendents who are starting to recognize that need as well. So back in May, with some funding from those school districts and from the ESD, we stood up this task force. So one of your board members, Felicita, has been on that task force since May. We've been meeting monthly to lay out a plan, a set of recommendations that we'll be taking to the Board of County Commission here in the spring. The task force is really rooted in a participatory process where decisions are made after getting work group recommendations. Decisions are voted on, and there's been some really strong alignment about what the program values and what we think the recommendation should center around. So you can move on to the next slide. I'm going to dive into a little bit of those right now. So the alignment, and Megan's done a beautiful job facilitating this process. But early on, we established a set of values, and this is the vision that's been formed. And then by March, there's going to be very specific sets of recommendations around these. So far, the task force is recommending a universal preschool program for all 3- and 4-year-olds in Washington County. If you remember back to that first slide Megan showed on the challenges, we have a little bit less than 16,000 3- and 4-year-olds currently in our county. if we use sort of what common research has shown with the program that becomes universal, you see about 80 or 85% of families wanting to participate, which means we need like 11,000 more preschool programs, preschool slots, that is, to serve those kids. So the vision here is that all those kids whose families want to be served could be served, that it's free for all families. We also know that you can't possibly turn a light switch and create 11,000 more preschool slots overnight. We would need, if successful, a ramp up period, and that we would prioritize, as one of the task force first set of recommendations, we would prioritize some of the most vulnerable families first in enrollment. That specifically would be families of color, families at a certain income threshold using self-sufficiency as the benchmark, and families of children in special education. That the preschool program needs to be high quality and developmentally appropriate. There needs to be culturally responsive and culturally specific opportunities for those kids and families. That there needs to be really strong supports for the early learning workforce that Megan talked about, which includes fair wages and supports around technical assistance and professional development to help professionalize the field and try to maintain some consistency in the workforce. We also know that 11,000 preschool slots is no small feat. We don't have the classroom space. Even if we had all the teachers ready to go, we don't have all the classroom spaces ready to go, which is also why we were interested in connecting. I know Sabrina's gonna, I think, close us off with some interest potentially with THPRD if we are successful at the ballot box. So we have infrastructure and small business supports that the task force has made a set of recommendations around, and then really important that the program is effective and responsibly administered. So I'm not going to dive into more of those details at this point, but happy to come back for the full set of recommendations when we conclude in March. If you go to the, I think it should be the next to final slide, this is how the the task force has been structured. And the work groups that are feeding those task forces recommendations, and then the parent and provider focus groups that have been conducted over the course of the summer into the fall. There's been 11 of those so far, with about 100 parents and providers participating to ensure their direct feedback is part of the sets of recommendations. You're going to see on the next slide some of the organizations who are involved in the task force and the work groups. All told, there's about 70 people involved. These are some of the organizations. So it's a real mix of community-based organizations, providers, parents, school districts, really runs the gamut, culturally specific providers in addition to community action Head Start. And so really intentional about setting a diverse table, and also a really racially diverse table, to move forward as their recommendations that will ultimately go to the Washington County Board of Commission. And if you go, oh, and also elected leaders, I should say. So both your colleague Felicita serves on that task force, along with Mayor Beatty of Beaverton and Mayor Calloway of Hillsborough, and also Chair Harrington from the Commission, and Commissioner Treese as well. So it should be the final slide, I believe, is the timeline slide. And then we are done in terms of the information sharing. So you'll see on this timeline slide, the task force kicked off in May. We'll wrap up in February, actually now March, and then we'll conclude with a set of recommendations. March into the summer is going to be policymaker engagement. At that level, there's going to be a pre-referral campaign steering committee that will form up to fine-tune around a funding mechanism. And then we'll move into campaign development, which will culminate, if successful, in the Board of County Commission referring this concept into a ballot that would be voted on in November. So this is the proposed timeline. Obviously, what we've learned throughout history, but especially over these last 2 years, is things are really fluid. But so far, we're on track to complete the recommendations from the task force at March 2022. So with that, I think I'm passing it back to Sabrina.
Thank you, Sarah. Greetings. In September, I presented to the board a detailed presentation about our preschool programs. Today, I'm going to do a short review of these programs. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. THPRD offers a 9-month preschool programs at Cedar Hills. We have the Kids First and the Jump Start program. At Conestoga Recreation and Aquatic Center, we offer the bilingual program and the Fano Farmhouse preschool program. And we also offer our Nature Kids program, preschool program at 12th and Hills Nature Center and the Jenkins Estate. Our preschool programs work towards the kindergarten readiness benchmarks, and our ratios in our program or 1 to 6, or 1 to 9, depending on the age of the students. THPRD also leases out space to Funny Farms, Small Friends, and Head Start for their preschool programs. Go to the next slide, please. Just to highlight the partnership that we value so much, we have partnered with Northwest Regional ESD for several years. We hold back 4 spots at each of our preschool timeframes for student placement. Currently, all of our preschool programs are full. Next slide, please. Our current challenges facing expansion are similar to what Sarah talked about. We have staffing capacity, space constraints, and just recruiting and retraining quality staff to fill these positions. And the next slide, please. We do see some possible opportunities to explore expanding to full day. Our preschool programs currently are half day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday programs. Also renting space to alternative providers that can, similar to what we do at Garden Home with our leasees. And really providing summer care for other 9-month preschool providers. For example, if there is a program that runs 9 months but doesn't run in the summer, maybe we could provide that continuous care to wrap it around on both sides. So that concludes my quick overview of what we have, I believe. So we'll take your questions and kick it back to you for discussion.
Lisa?
Thank you.
Lisa.
And thank you, Megan and Sarah, so much, and Sabrina, you too. I just wanted to quickly say that I appreciate, I think it's really important that y'all understand just how like diverse and thoughtful and democratic the process of at the task force. And it's really providers and parents being lifted up to shape what the policy is. I'm probably the person who knows the least at the table, and I'm like totally okay admitting that because there's such smart people at the table who have done this work for so long. And I mostly just listen and learn. So I just want y'all know my values. So I'm really happy to be a part of this in any capacity.
Does anybody else have any questions? I guess I have a question. So I know you guys mentioned potentially coming to THPRD once things are finalized and stuff, and I was just trying to see, I'm sure you have some kind of formulation in mind of what you would like to see from us or what support you can get from us. So I was hoping you guys could touch a little bit on that if possible, if you guys are ready to do that.
I really appreciate that question. I probably should have offered that at the end before closing. So we do have a support form that we are asking boards to sign. And at this point, it's not to support a ballot measure. I'll try to grab it and put it in the chat here in a second. It's not to support a ballot measure, but it's to support that concept that I laid out. And so I was just at the Hillsborough School District last night, and they voted to sign. Individuals can also sign. So as an individual in the community, signing is also really a helpful show of support. Again, if it's successful in moving through the county commission and getting to refer to the ballot, then the campaign would come back for a ballot measure support. So it's not what this is at this point, but you'll see in the document, if we can grab it and get in the chat in time, it's a high-level show of support around the concept I showed on that slide around the vision statement. So that would be wonderful at this point.
I popped it in the chat for folks.
Thank you, Megan. And so either as an individual or as the board.
Sounds great. We will, I'm sure, definitely support that. And then besides that, as far as whenever this does, because we do need it and it gets off the ground and hopefully goes through, do you guys envision, how do you envision THPRD kind of fitting into this mold or this potential future plan?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage Felicita and Sabrina to, I think you've probably been thinking about that for quite a while now. At a high level, I mean, we talked about those 11,000 more slots. So if THPRD is able to expand and offer full day programs to serve some of those kids, I think that would probably be the most immediate way, but I want to make sure that your colleagues who've been involved get an opportunity to think that through out loud too.
I was just going to say that there's some, as part of the vision and values, there are certain rules that all organizations that are participating will have to follow. As an example, like expulsions won't be allowed. And so it's most likely at the program level, not necessarily at the board level, but there'll need to be conversations about how are we as an organization going to participate in this? How are we evolving and growing and ensuring that we're living our values to meet the need?
And then is the task force thinking that most of these spots are going to be full-time to assist with daycare, or are they going to be, because like lots of just preschool only are usually like 3 or 4 hours. They're not necessarily an all-day kind of thing.
So the task force has decided to allow for flexibility to be supportive of parents choosing the program that's the best fit for the child. So there'll be a mixture of full day and half day slots, as well as a mixture of school year only and year round slots. So there is some flexibility in there. The recommendation is that those slots are contracted for in line with the community's actual need. So my guess is it will tilt toward full-time slots because that's what so many working families need, and our data source on that is 211 and what families are asking for when they call 211. Imperfect data source maybe, since we know every family doesn't call 211, but it's decent at least to make some guesses. But there will be, I think your programs are half day right now. There's some flexibility built in there, especially, and at the program level, it might be interesting for your program staff to think with more resource, with like the amount of resource it actually takes to do an amazing preschool program, what would they want the program to look like? So I think that there's lots of space to ask questions about how it could work currently and how it might look in the future, should you decide you want to expand.
Thank you.
And really concretely, probably getting the set of recommendations over to Sabrina. Felicita mentioned some of those around no expulsions and suspensions, getting those over around program length and half day versus full day, and starting to think through like, where are we now on this and where would we need to grow or expand so that you're really well prepared. I mean, obviously nothing is certain. We continue to be optimistic, but to be thinking in advance, okay, here's where we would already meet some of these recommendations. Where would we need to grow in order to be able to apply for the funding to expand?
Fredo?
Hi, thanks for the information. So I'm just curious, so let's kind of zoom forward a little bit, and I'm just, for my own education, so let's optimistically say ballot measure is a success. What then happens? How quickly can we scale up even partners like THPRD, and what's kind of a general timeline like that?
The way that we're planning it and kind of modeling it out includes 18 months of like startup implementation planning time, which is, gosh, having worked for the state and launched the Preschool Promise program with only 9 months of implementation time, I'm a huge advocate for like, don't take too long because the need is urgent, but take the time that it takes to actually stand up a new program and do it well. So there's an 18-month implementation planning and startup time period. And then we are actually currently modeling out a ambitious slot rollout and a more moderate slot rollout. And the task force is getting their first look at that timeline next week. So I don't want to share it publicly before the task force has even seen it, but we're thinking about how many slots can be rolled out per year and what is the system's current capacity to absorb that, given some of the need to build more programs up. That information will all be included in the final report. And I hate when I feel like I'm being cagey, but it's truly just that the task force hasn't even seen it yet. So we want to give them the chance to look at it before we share too much more.
And that planning will be really helpful, obviously, to stand up a brand new system, right? You need to have providers enroll and families enroll and communication to both providers and families. There's also just like a mechanism question around if something were to pass in November. We haven't talked too much about funding mechanisms, but it would go into it. So that's November 2022. If you're changing the tax code, it would be in a 2023, and then people pay those taxes in April of 2024. So there's also just a logistics to a revenue mechanism and when it would come to fruition.
Heidi?
Yeah, and I think this is more for my board colleagues and our THPRD group. As we work with BSD and all of our after school planning, I think we really need to wrap the pre-K preschool into these conversations as well. Because BSD currently has maybe 8 schools, I think, with Preschool Promise moving forward and are doing the pre-K option. So just a note for us as a board and our folks to really not just be talking about after school, but also how can we couple that pre-K preschool into a nice package there with our Beaverton School District friends.
Yeah, if I can add as well, Heidi, that's an excellent point. I mean, we do have an upcoming meeting with the school district, I think literally between the holidays, to continue discussions with regard to after school. But Dawn Grodin and I have talked about, you know, the advent of pre-K coming and the hopes that it's coming, not to influence any upcoming support, but the realities of balancing all that programming with our existing programming. That's going to be some healthy communication with our public, surveying people of where do they want to see their park district going, you know, in the programming aspects. Because uniquely, we do have some space that could be available, but much of that space has programs that exist. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree and understand. And maybe if, you know, we can potentially have some good information sharing with the school district, you know, through the inquiries that they get through their inquiry forms to their schools, you know, how, you know, what does that look like? How many, what's the need? I think that will help us sort of fill in some of the gaps too. We have some of that information, obviously, through our inquiries, but yeah, just to continue with them as a partner.
And Don Groding, as a superintendent, has been really actively involved in supporting this task force. So he's involved and aware of the work of it as well. So I think that conversation would be well timed.
Great. I did have one last question. I think on the slides it said you guys were focusing on 3- and 4-year-olds, but does that mean preschool's gonna go for 2 years potentially for those 3-year-olds? Or is this like a 1-year preschool and then
That's the hope. Yeah, you wouldn't want to leave kids with preschool as a 3-year-old and then a gap at 4. So the hope is to be able to serve them for those 2 years. The vision right now is all 3- and 4-year-olds because there's so much research on the value of those 2 years of preschool. The only thing that could wind up changing that is as we do the cost modeling and look at the revenue modeling, if there's not enough funding to do 3s and 4s, then the task force would need to have a conversation about what expenses do you want to prioritize as this phases in. But the vision is 3- and 4-year-olds and 2 years for those 3-year-olds.
Thank you.
And it hasn't come up directly here yet, but I know as policymakers, you probably are tracking what's happening at the state or federal level. So if the federal Build It Back Better proposal does pass, which is a big if right now, our initial analysis, and that actually by the Children's Institute and Family Forward, is that you absolutely would, to receive those funding, would need a state investment. And the modeling that the federal plan is based off of shows that we would still need a local investment to meet the vision as defined by the task force. So the vision is to offer those full year programs to families. And what we understand to date about the Build It Back Better federal plan is that it would be a school year length program. And so we would need to complement that with some local funding. But if we do as a country move towards some investment in early childhood, the ballot measure language would be written in such a way that you could lower the amount of revenue needed to be generated at the local level if there's federal or state funding that comes in to create more preschool in the county as well.
Great, thank you guys. That was a great presentation.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And for Sabrina for taking the time to prep with us, and Lisita for being on the task force since May.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, was that our only thing for work session today? Yes. Okay,
Right.
so then I guess we'll close and come back to executive session at 6:30. We have 15 minutes to stuff some dinner down. See you guys in a little bit.
Bye.
All right.